Hello and welcome to the program. I'm Tamara Rosevan. The March 23rd murder in broad daylight of former Russian MP and noted Putin critic Denis Voronenkov shook the international community. Many viewed it as another warning for what could happen to those who speak out against the Putin regime. Joining me to discuss the impact of the killing is Russian politician Ilya Ponomarev, who gained international recognition for being the only Russian MP to vote against the annexation of Crimea. Welcome to the program.
Hello.
So, what does Voronenkov's murder say about Putin's Russia?
It says that they would not stop on murdering Litvinenko or Lesin or Berezovsky or Nemtsov. They would continue these tactics. And the president of Ukraine, in his address to the nation, he said that it's an act of state terror. And I totally agree with him, but I think that it's important to understand that it's an act of state terror versus Russian elite primarily, because the message that Putin wants to send is don't switch sides, don't go and help Ukrainians, don't go and ally with the West, that we will get you in whatever part of the world you will be.
And a lot of media has portrayed it and have dubbed it as an assassination of a Putin critic. Now, do you truly believe that the Kremlin will murder people in order to silence Putin critics?
No, actually, I don't see any other credible version, unfortunately. Denis was not involved in any kind of business activities. He knew virtually no one in Ukraine. He just arrived. I know quite well all his state of things, and I was helping him to file all the paperwork for Interpol, so I know quite deeply what he's all about and what is the state of his falsified criminal cases that were open against him in Russia. So I don't see any other motive. You know, theoretically that could be a revenge on behalf of former president of Ukraine, because Vornonenkov was testifying against him in the very high-profile case here, but that was unnecessary, and Voronenkov's testimony was not the only evidence, and by killing him, they are not achieving anything. And if the motive, what I said, would be to terrorize the elite that is still in Russia, to terrorize his former fellow parliamentarians, that makes total sense.
I see. Now, it's probably difficult for you to talk about the events of that day when Mr. Voronenkov was murdered in broad daylight in Kiev. Now, he was on his way to meet you.
Yes. And
you were supposed to meet to have a discussion about something to have. What was the main idea? What were you going to talk about?
We were going to talk about that Interpol request. Voronenkov was expecting that Russia would file a request for red notice for Interpol, and in such cases you usually write to Interpol a kind of preemptive letter to notify Interpol that there is a politically motivated prosecution. You put all the arguments to showcase that it's politically and politically motivated case, and you also provide your current whereabouts, so that please don't search for us. We are here in Ukraine, the National Bureau.
I'm not hiding from anybody. Exactly.
Yeah, we are not hiding.
Exactly, and you've said to a lot of media organizations that Voronenkov had a lot of insider knowledge about how different financial schemes, inside Putin's inner circle, how people there had some kind of schemes going on and how they were siphoning off money. Now, would you say that this is valuable information that could have been potentially used to bring charges against individuals close to Putin?
You know, I think it's extremely valuable, and it's especially valuable in particular for Ukraine, because as we know, the war in eastern Ukraine and Donbass is being financed not officially through Russia's state budget. It's financed through illegal financial schemes, through illegal activities, through primarily smuggling events that are happening across Ukraine Ukrainian and separatist borders through Russian territory to other countries. So this knowledge about how this whole thing is being organized, who is in charge, what are the particular banks, where are the accounts, who are the
And he had all this
placeholders.
information.
Yeah, he had this information, yeah. He was in charge of fighting against smuggling in Russia Federation for many years. So he knows the schemes.
He knows the schemes that potentially were used to funnel weapons and manpower into eastern Ukraine, where government troops are fighting Russian-backed forces right now.
Right,
is what you're basically saying.
primarily how to channel money there and how to launder money which are going from that areas to other parts of the world, and whether this money is being used to buy weapons or ammunition or anything else, and that's a second story.
Has he passed, or did he pass that information on to you?
No.
Did he pass it? Do you know of anybody else who could have obtained that information, or is it lost forever now, basically?
I don't know, but I'm afraid that most of it is lost.
So this could have been a very key, crucial aspect in Ukraine's case to prove that Russia is financing and bringing soldiers into Donbass.
You know, I think that in terms of proving, you know, Ukraine has plenty of different evidence. You know, there are pictures, there is evidence of people who saw that. You know, so in terms of like going to The Hague and to other places and proving the fact of aggression, there is enough evidence. The question is how to disrupt the war that is going there, how to stop financing this war, how to identify Ukrainians and Russians who are involved in this. And unfortunately, there are a lot of people from Ukraine who helping to finance the war and finance the separatism, and they need to be stopped.
But potentially, if you had that information about how these networks were being, Russians were participating in these networks and which Ukrainian individuals were taking part of that, wouldn't you say that's a very crucial piece of evidence that Ukraine would have benefited greatly from?
Very much so, especially that the war is hybrid. So I said that many times that it's worth several brigades at the front line. I think that it was extremely valuable, and I'm really sorry that it was underappreciated and that the government was, as usual, too slow to react and to pick it up.
It's quite interesting. Now, coming back to you now. I have a quote here. Famously, Putin said that enemies are right in front of you. You are at war with them. Now, you can make an armistice with them, and it's all clear. But a traitor must be crushed. That's a very strong sentence. But how do you think Putin views dissidents in Ukraine? Do you think he views them as traitors, or do you think he views them as enemies? No,
different people would be viewed differently. I think that in case of Denis Voronenkov, it was absolutely, obviously, the definition of traitor, because he was a military officer, uniformed person, who decided to switch sides, who assumed Ukrainian citizenship. So I think that for Putin's crippled mindset, that's the perfect definition of a traitor. In regards to myself, I was his enemy from the day one. I was always in the opposition party, and I always was his open critic and played, so to say, by the rules. So I think that I am more in the first category of enemies.
I see. Now, in 2012, a Russian opposition activist was kidnapped and taken to Moscow. He was kidnapped in Lviv. He was later sentenced to 4 years in prison. Basically, he was an activist, and
he was my political aide. He was kidnapped in the center of Kiev and smuggled across the border. 4.5 years in prison. He's now in a camp in Siberia. He is about to be released this summer, hopefully, so it's coming to the end, but nevertheless, he spent 4.5 years in Siberian camp.
Do you see him coming to Ukraine as well?
I don't know. It's hard to tell. Leonid, as I know, is pretty critical of Maidan He thinks that it's very much driven by nationalists, and he's leftist, and he doesn't like that, and that's why I'm not sure whether he would be coming here. I very much hope that Russian government would allow him in general to travel, and that we will meet somewhere in Europe with him and with other friends of mine. 10 of my political aides right now, they are under political asylum in different countries, and of course, you know, we are meeting from time to time. Hopefully we will see Leonid and Sergei Udaltsov and other jailed activists also with us.
I see, and he's just one of several Putin critics who've met very difficult fates, and there were kidnappings and murders, just as with Mr. Voronenkov, and this makes a lot of people skeptical about how safe the Ukrainian government can keep Russian dissidents. Now, have you had any thoughts about moving elsewhere, not staying in Ukraine?
No, when I wound up being in the West without a possibility to return for my country, and it was not a voluntary move from me, on my behalf, I was just traveling on the business trip, and Russian government revoked my right to cross the border, the national border of the country, so I couldn't physically come back to Russia. And originally I wound up being in the United States because I was like literally penniless. I need to make some money just to survive. So my first year was in the United States. And I was consciously wanting from the very beginning to come here to Ukraine. So I moved to Ukraine because I feel like being in Ukraine I am useful, and I think that the best thing that I can do for my country is to make Ukraine successful and to prove to my constituents that revolution will bring prosperity and freedom if that would happen back home in my country. So for me it was a very conscious choice, and I don't think that Ukraine is way more dangerous than other places. Unfortunately, many of my friends were murdered in other countries. My friend Alexander Litvinenko or Boris Berezovsky, they were murdered in London, being protected by MI6. Or definitely not my friend, but a person whom I knew, Mikhail Lesin, who defected from Russia to United States, was under protection of FBI and was murdered in the center of Washington, D.C. So even being under protection of most powerful security services in the world does not help. So I better be here at war and fight for peace and freedom.
I see. Very nice. But what kind of message would you have for those that don't potentially wish you the best in Russia, who see you as a traitor, who see you as an enemy? What kind of message do you have for them?
My message is very simple. The history will tell. And I think that the most unpatriotic government we ever have, this is the one which is currently at power in Moscow. And I think that everybody who is calling me traitor, and most of them are real patriots, they are just disoriented by state propaganda. When this propaganda will disappear, they will realize where we are and who is the real friend of Russia and who is the real foe.
I see. Now, the recent protests in Moscow, there was a lot of young people who came out and who basically these were people in their early 20s who are teens and who've never lived, who've never seen a different president other than Putin, basically. Right. And there's been a lot of media speculation about how these protests, how they will develop, and whether it will stick, whether this will make a change, and whether the message will be heard across Russia, because obviously they were in various cities, 99 cities, Navalny called for protests across 99 cities. Now, would you say that they're going to be successful? Does Putin have something to worry about?
No, of course he has to worry about. And he has to worry about even without those protests, because the way he leads the country, he provokes the social unrest and social explosion. Because people are not living any better. They are suffering. The feeling of social injustice within the country is growing. Right now he is feeding them with all these aggressive rhetorics but you cannot replace food with bombs. And I think it's inevitable that young generation in particular, who is less poisoned with this propaganda, at the end of the day will stand up and say, Mr. President, it's time to go. And I think that we saw right now that the passion is there, that the desire to come and to speak is there. And whether it would be Navalny or somebody else, or whether it would be just, you know, a leaderless grassroots protest, of course, that would lead inevitable to the change in the country.
I see. Very strong, a strong message, no doubt. Thank you so much for joining me today in the studio. Thank
you very much for having me.
You were watching an interview with Mr. Ilya Ponomarev. He's a former Russian MP and a politician, and you're watching UA TV.